The next item of business is a statement by John Swinney on analysis of the 2019 exam diet. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on John Swinney for 10 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Sir, education is the highest priority of this government because we want all of Scotland's children and young people to reach their full potential. We believe we have a moral imperative to ensure that all young people in Scotland receive a first-class education in their local school. Monitoring and analysing performance is key to ensuring that we deliver this overriding aim. That is why this government and its partners regularly consider young people's performance in exams and take action to support continued strong performance. I previously committed in this chamber that I would publish analysis of the 2019 exam diet, and that is what I did last Thursday. 4 papers produced by the Association of Directors of Education of Scotland, Education Scotland, the Scottish Qualifications Authority and the Scottish Government, considering diet performance, were published, including summary information and proposed system-wide actions for partners. A substantial proportion of this information was also contained within a response to an FOI review that I was advised required to be answered last Thursday in order to meet the statutory deadline. Because the bulk of the material formed part of the review response, I took the decision to release both the report and the review concurrently. I was conscious of my commitment to Parliament to publish this material and therefore did not feel it would have been appropriate to release it to a private individual alone without also making it available to Parliament through general publication. I must be clear with Parliament, however, that it was never our intention to release this as late in the day as ultimately took place. The necessary material for issue was approved at approximately 5:30 p.m. This is later than would have been ideal, but given the deadline I had been advised of, I proceeded with publication. I have subsequently been advised that the statutory deadline was incorrect. It is therefore deeply unfortunate that a series of issues delayed publication, including the issuing of a press release, until later that same evening. I can assure Parliament, however, that we sought to be as timely and as informative as possible with this publication, but it must not be forgotten that much of this material is not new. Indeed, much of it has been available since August last year, as the SQA publish a commentary on exam results and individual course reports annually. Members will also be keenly aware of the number of times that we have discussed this information both in this chamber and at committee. I am not suggesting that such an important issue does not merit discussion, far from it. I welcome any discussion on this government's education record and the significant improvements delivered. However, what I hope we can all agree on is the need to focus discussion on positive steps that can be taken to support our young people in achieving their potential. It is important to note that the papers demonstrate an excellent collaboration with our partners in considering the drivers of exam performance, which has identified a range of actions to underpin future positive performance in exams. I previously set out to the Education and Skills Committee on the 27th of November 2019 that the key areas to focus on when following up this analysis included partners conducting further work to ensure there is alignment of the curriculum and assessment journey from S1 to S6, partners considering how to better support professional learning and development, and maintaining a clear focus on enhancing learning and teaching. The papers released last week included further details as to how this could be achieved. Actions set out included the following: that partners will remind teachers and schools of the various materials and activities available to support professional learning, particularly for any subjects where course reports have identified specific issues. That the SQA will evaluate its approach to assessment and the ongoing appropriateness of that approach. The identification of key priorities for support for learning, teaching and assessment. The Education Scotland Senior Regional Advisors would discuss national qualifications result with local authority directors to identify which schools need further support or challenge and how best to meet any need in a collaborative and empowered system. Agreeing how to identify schools that need the most support to raise attainment and how to identify follow-up action. The Education Scotland and the Association of Directors of Education agreeing how to share performance across regional improvement collaboratives and to include follow-up action within the plans of those collaboratives. And longer-term work to ensure the alignment of the curriculum and the assessment journey from S1 to S6. All partners considering coordinated enhancement to support professional learning and development, and all partners providing evidence to feed into the ongoing discussions on performance. There will be a focus on delivering these actions to support future performance, and I would also highlight actions underway, such as expanding teacher numbers to a 10-year high and increasing the focus on enhancing learning and teaching, strengthening leadership, reducing workload and promoting teacher empowerment, empowering schools with the resources and the flexibility they need to close the attainment gap and meet the distinctive needs of pupils through pupil equity funding, increasing the capacity of local authorities and schools facing the greatest challenges through the Scottish Attainment Challenge, and strengthen the capacity to support improvement in our education system by creating regional improvement collaboratives and expanding the work of Education Scotland, including the appointment of 6 senior regional advisors and 32 attainment advisors, 1 for each authority. An additional action identified was to continue to raise the profile of the mixed economy of awards and pathways, including to consider a second National Achievement Day, celebrating the impact of a wider range of pathways. We should never forget that one of the key aims of Curriculum for Excellence is to support all children and young people to achieve their potential, and to do so in whichever form that may take. Statistics released just this week show that the number of young people achieving 1 or more awards monitored as part of developing the young workforce reached 17.1% last year, up from 14.8% the year before. It is entirely appropriate to consider the drivers of exam performance and to better understand how we may best support future performance, but this should be done in parallel with recognising the significant achievements to celebrate in Scottish education. We have more young people leaving for positive destinations than ever before, and there have been significant improvements for school leavers in achieving 1 or more national qualifications at levels 4 to 7 over time. Specifically, performance at level 6 at Highers has improved. When the government took office, significantly less than half of pupils, 41.6% to be precise, left school with a higher or equivalent or better. Direct comparison cannot always be made due to changes in the precise way that statistics are collected. But what I can say is that the latest figure is over 60%, at 60.5% of pupils at least at that level. Where we can make direct comparisons, we find those getting a higher or better is up more than 10 percentage points on 2009-10, from 50.4% to 60.5% in 2018-19. The attainment gap is closing here too. For those achieving higher level awards or better, the gap between the most and the least well off has fallen by 1/5 since 2009-10. It is not the case that some subjects matter more than others. However, when we look at the subjects taken by the most pupils, the majority of the top 10 have seen pass rates increase since 2015. Maths, chemistry, modern studies, physics, biology and geography, major subjects, are all up. And we should acknowledge volatility in pass rates. Last year saw an increase in the pass rate at National 5 and a fall in the pass rate at Higher on the previous year. We cannot expect a continual increase in pass rates. The published papers set out pass rates by exam and did so with a clear warning that where subjects have small numbers of entries, changes in pass rates should be considered with caution. This is important from advice from the SQA that should assist constructive and dispassionate consideration of the content of the papers. What is clear is that there are plenty of achievements by our children and young people to celebrate and to build upon. We can at the same time celebrate current successes and also recognise that time may yet still be needed to fully achieve what we've been working towards. I remain committed to the changes we have instituted and continue to believe that they are the right things to do. In so doing, I'm also committed to working with our partners to continue to monitor performance, to learn and to drive further improvement. The Government has engaged constructively with Parliament on a further element of this process through a review of the curriculum, and I was pleased to set out yesterday the terms of the review. Presiding Officer, it is right to consider exam performance, and it is right to share the messages from that. That is what I said I would do, and that is what I did. There is plenty to celebrate in the achievements of our young people, and we will continue with our efforts to ensure there can be many more in the future. The published papers set out what future actions are needed, and these will be taken forward to ensure that each young person in Scotland will be able to achieve their full potential.
The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement. I'll allow around 20 minutes for that, and it would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question were to press the request to speak buttons now. And I call Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for prior sight of the statement? Having only taken up the education brief a week ago, it is clear that there is much good work going on in Scottish education. There are many people who are passionately working to deliver the best education they can. But from the volume of correspondence in my inbox, Presiding Officer, and what we've learned this past week, we now know, actually, that the number of people leaving school with at least one qualification has dropped. The number of people leaving school with the gold standard of 3 hires or more is at the lowest since 2014. There was a significant drop in pass rates at the higher level in key subjects such as English, Maths and History, some subjects dropping by as much as 10%, far beyond acceptable annual variation. We know that the remit for the review into the Curriculum for Excellence has now been expanded after political pressure from these benches and others, all the while the Cabinet Secretary protesting that everything was fine. And yesterday we learned in a well-respected piece of research by the University of Dundee that Scotland has lost its coveted place at the top of the UK's nations for children's reading. So, Presiding Officer, the jargon and excuse-filled statement we've just had from Mr Swinney simply won't wash. Let me ask him specifically. Does he disagree with teachers who believe that a 10% drop is way more than the anticipated or acceptable levels of annual volatility in exam rates? Does he accept that the fact that attainment across many levels has been in decline for the past 5 years, which seems to suggest that reforms to the curriculum or examination structures have not been as effective as they were intended? And does he not accept that the closure of the attainment gap is actually a result of a higher decline in attainment amongst the least deprived, rather than a levelling up from those in the most deprived? I know we all want to get this right, but until the Education Secretary has the humility to accept that when something is not working, it needs to be fixed, we won't get this right. And that will be a shame which rests on his head and his party's for a long time to come.
John Swinney.
President Officer, I think I know Mr Green's just recently assumed office, but if he looks at what I've said and what I said yesterday in the speech that I gave at the Wesley Hales Education Centre, I made it expressly clear that I do not believe everything is perfect. I believe there are constantly issues that we need to improve in Scottish education, and I face up to those issues. I do take some reassurance from the assessment of the International Council of Education Advisors who met in Scotland last week. And their judgment, which I quoted yesterday, was that the Scottish education system is taking all of the approaches and the interventions that they would expect to see in a high-performing education system. Now, that is not to say that everything is perfect. It is to recognise that we are taking a set of interventions that are designed to strengthen performance. Now, Mr Green made reference to the reading survey that was issued today, but of course the Conservatives make a lot out of the PISA figures on a regular basis, and of course the PISA analysis, which came out relatively recently, just before the turn of the year, indicated a significant increase in performance in reading in Scotland, to the point where there are only 5 countries in the world that have a discernibly stronger performance in reading than Scotland on the survey that the Conservatives themselves believe to be the strongest assessment of performance. Now, on his point about volatility in exams, there will be exam volatility. If Mr Green is going to argue that exam pass rates must constantly increase, then he will be at odds with all prevailing educational opinion that recognises we cannot have constantly rising pass rates. So there will be volatility in individual subjects, but I also made the point in my statement that in the large volume qualifications, the majority of those at higher saw an increase in the pass rates. The second point is that Mr Green said there had been a 5-year fall in attainment. Well, I have the figures for the percentage of school leavers attaining 1 or more pass at SCQF level 4, 5 or 6 in front of me. And over the last, I accept in the last year, in 2018-19, there are slight falls in those figures. But in all of the previous, let's go back 5 years, back to 13-14 on the higher, and it was 58.1%, and it's now 60.5%. Now that's an increase. If we go back even further, in 2009-10 at SCQF level 6, the percentage of young people achieving 1 or more pass rate at SCQF level 6 was 50.4%. It's now 60.5%. That's a huge increase in performance. And lastly, I'm absolutely committed to working to close the poverty-related attainment gap, and I'm determined to take all of the necessary interventions that I can to ensure that's the case. There is clear evidence across a majority of indicators that we are closing that attainment gap. Yes, it will take time, but the Government's resolve is absolute to secure that objective.
Colleen Gray.
Thank you, and thanks to the Deputy First Minister for early sight of his statement, if not early sight of the report itself. I remember some convoluted excuse notes from my teaching days, but today's opening explanation was indeed a classic of the genre. However, we have the analysis now, and I have 3 questions. Firstly, can we just agree that the key finding is a 4-year trend of falling attainment in the majority of subjects at all levels, except for a slight 1-year improvement in National 5? Secondly, will the OECD review not just have this analysis available to them, but will they be expected to consider whether these trends are indeed driven by the curricular structure? And finally, I've been struck by the response from a number of teachers that they see the problem as the loss in most schools of specialist subject principal teachers and in all authorities of specialist subject advisors. Will Mr Swinney take positive steps to reverse this unplanned change to how our schools are structured?
John Swinney.
On the first point that Mr Gray raises, we have to look at performance over a number of years. And when we look at that performance, as I've just rehearsed with Mr Green, we see a strong rise in the attainment of young people of the percentage of school leavers attaining 1 or more pass at SCQF level 4, 5 or 6 over the duration of this government. Now, when he talks about the hires, and I've heard his point about the pass rate at higher, Mr Gray knows full well there is no statistical difference for 3 years in the pass rate performance. He knows that. Mr Gray is a man who knows his numbers. He's experienced in that as a teacher, a former teacher. He knows there is no statistical significant difference in 3 years of those numbers, with the exception, which I have always accepted, of the fall in the pass rate between 2017-18 and 2018-19. But Mr Gray must also accept from me that the reverse took place in the National 5 pass rate, where it fell in 2017-18 and it went up in 2018-19. So that analysis must be seen over the period of time. On the second point about the OECD will be free to look at whatever the OECD considers appropriate to look at. And they can consider all aspects of these questions as they undertake the review. It will be independent of government, and it's not for me to prejudge how the OECD goes about that exercise. Thirdly, Mr Gray, I think, knows from what I've said before that I think the loss of subject specialisms in schools has been a matter of regret. It's taken place over a number of years, which is why, under the Career Pathways development work that I commissioned from Professor Moira Bolland of the University of Glasgow, I have supported the development of career specialisms within the teaching profession to ensure that some of that capacity can be restored. So that's the first thing I've done. And the second thing is that by the investments that I've made in Education Scotland over the last 2 years, we have strengthened the subject capability within Education Scotland, and we have also strengthened the regional capability of Education Scotland to be able to support improvement in our schools. And those are reforms that I think will benefit schools in Scotland.
Can I say here that the guidelines are that front bench questions would take 5 minutes, and here we are almost halfway through the session. There are backbenchers who will not be able to ask questions today. And I call Ross Greer to be followed by Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you. On Tuesday, I asked the Cabinet Secretary about shortfalls in the pass rate for specific subjects such as higher history and the need to investigate those declines. There is a clear trend across most higher subjects, though, indicating a systematic issue as well as specific course problems. Teachers have repeatedly identified the problem with excessive performance indicators and how they create a perverse incentive towards a burdensome tick box culture of teaching. So can I ask, will the Scottish Government take action to address the number and the role of performance indicators?
John Swinney.
I'd be very pleased to explore the specifics of the issue that Mr Greer raises with me. As he knows, I have taken steps to remove many performance indicators. I removed unit assessments, which were burdensome, I accept, and I've removed them over a 3-year period at my request. We have removed all manner of pointless bureaucracy about management, for example, in the broad general education of experiences and outcomes and whether they are satisfied in all circumstances. So if Mr Greer wants to write to me with some specific points about indicators, I'll happily consider that, because I have no interest in the collection of pointless information if it distracts teachers from enhancing learning and teaching.
Beatrice Wishart, followed by Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I also add my thanks to the Cabinet Secretary for early sight of the statement. The Cabinet Secretary said yesterday that pupil equity funding has been provided on a sustained basis, but our analysis of government figures has found that the total PEF allowance for 2019-20 is lower than what was actually spent last year in 23 local authority areas. And that means support might actually be scaled back in some areas this year. So will the Cabinet Secretary commit to making PEF a permanent feature of Scottish education with multi-year settlements so that investment decisions can be made for children for the long term and providing greater certainty to schools and staff?
John Swinney.
Let me reassure Beatrice Wishart that we allocate £120 million of pupil equity funding for each year. If it is not spent in that year, the allocations are protected and preserved to enable them to be spent in subsequent years by the individual schools concerned. So there is, if a school does not spend all of its PEF allocation in 1 year, it does not lose that allocation, it is carried forward. So if there is an example where that's not happened, I would be happy to explore it, but it shouldn't have happened. The government has had a manifesto commitment to sustain pupil equity funding up until March 2021. I confirmed some months ago that we would extend that to March 2022 because we will formulate a budget in the spring of next year which will cover the financial year to the end of 2022. So for as long as the line of sight I have as in this parliamentary term, PEF will be a permanent feature of education spending. And if there is any carryover from 1 year to the next, I assure Beatrice Wishart that that should be available to individual schools. But if she has any examples where it's not the case, I would encourage her to write to me and I'll follow that up.
Claire Adamson, followed by Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Recent figures have shown that in my area of North Lanarkshire, 94.3% of school leavers in 2018-19 went on to positive destinations after school. This compared with 86.9 in 2009-10. Can the Deputy First Minister outline how the Scottish Government will build on the excellent work already being undertaken throughout the learner journey to prepare pupils for destinations after school?
John Swinney.
There will be there's some very good work going on in schools across the country, and it will be the case also, and it is the case in North Lanarkshire as well. I saw it when Claire Adamson and I visited Braidhurst High School in her own constituency, where there is strong work being undertaken through the Developing Scotland's Young Workforce agenda, which connects school pupils increasingly with the world of work. It's enhanced also by the availability of foundation apprenticeships, which are a strong new element of the learner journey to enable young people to progress in that fashion. There will be some groups where we face more significant challenges in relation to positive destinations, and they will undoubtedly be amongst young people with additional support needs and young people who are care experienced. And as Claire Adamson will be familiar, the Government is taking a range of measures, particularly in the light of the Care Review report, to make sure that we work to strengthen the outcomes for young people who are care experienced to ensure they can enjoy the same positive destinations as the overwhelming majority of Claire Adamson's constituents will be experiencing.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, followed by Daniel Johnson.
In their analysis document last week, the Scottish Government said pass rates are only part of the attainment story, which seems a casual lack of concern when faced with another year when attainment has fallen across a range of outcomes. What the Scottish Government seems to be ignoring at these pass rates represent individuals who risk being left with the consequences of this decline in standards for the rest of their lives. So can I ask the Deputy First Minister, if he does indeed, and I quote, welcome any discussion on this government's education record, why has his government failed to bring forward a full debate on education in this chamber for 2 years? And will he give the commitment today to ensure that more government time is given over this year to debate what was once their #1 priority?
John Swinney.
Subject to the agreement of the Parliamentary Bureau, there will be a government debate on education on the 17th of March.
Daniel Johnson, followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. In his answer to Claire Adamson, the Cabinet Secretary mentions the need to focus on ASN, but recently released figures from the SC highlight that since 2012, spend per pupil for those with ASN has fallen by 26%, and the number of specialist ASN support staff has decreased by 403. So how does the Cabinet Secretary explain this worrying trend? What will he do to fix it? And does he agree with me that we simply cannot address the ASN attainment gap without those specialist staff?
As Mr Johnson will be aware, Presiding Officer, the Government has invested £15 million of additional expenditure into supporting additional support needs education. That will, of course, be subject to decision this afternoon when, of course, the Government's budget has to pass to enable that expenditure to be undertaken, which I'm sure will be a point that Mr Johnson is reflecting on as he goes forward. And I think I properly heard Ms Mara's aside, and I'll just say to her that I'm very pleased that local authority investment in education has been rising for 3 years in a row, and that's a welcome investment in the education of our young people in challenging times. So I assure Mr Johnson of the absolute determination of the Government to invest properly. I am awaiting, as he knows, the outcome of the review undertaken by Angela Morgan into additional support needs education, and I look forward to engaging with the review on the issues that have been raised to address directly the point that Mr Johnson raises.
Rona Mackay, followed by Liz Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's outline of the reviewed remit and thank him for his communication with the Education and Skills Committee during this process. How will the review seek to engage directly with teachers and hear the views of education practitioners across the board?
John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, I intend to establish as part of the review a practitioner forum which will enable the voice of practitioners to be heard within the review, and also for the voice of young people to be heard within that review, because it is so important that the lived experience of those who are teaching and experiencing education in Scotland is heard by the OECD in this review.
Liz Smith.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I was very encouraged to hear that you are, within the remit, going to be looking at the responsibilities for curriculum design and support. Could I just clarify why that means that the OECD will be examining the role that Education Scotland and SQA has in that respect?
John Swinney.
First of all, Presiding Officer, it's the first opportunity I've had to acknowledge the reshuffle in the Conservative benches at Liz Smith's, or the impact on Liz Smith, and thank her for her long interest in education. I had hoped for a moment that that long interest had stopped, but she's just asked another question on education, so I presume it must be. We're going to be stuck with it for some time to come, which of course will be a privilege and a pleasure for me to experience it. In relation to the roles in curriculum design, the OECD will be open, as I answered to Mr Gray, to look at the issues that they believe to be relevant. I'm not going to prescribe to the OECD what they think should be explored, but the topics and the themes are there for the OECD to consider as part of that review.
Quickly, Jenny Mara.
The number of children leaving school in Dundee without any qualifications has risen again, 0.8% in 2011 to 4.8% today. These children leaving school have had every day, week, month and year of their education under the SNP. They've been utterly failed by nationalism. Now, Dundee has yet to set its budget. Will Mr Swinney pick up the phone to John Alexander today and tell him not to make cuts to education in Dundee?
Quickly, please, Mr Swinney.
Well, as I accurately predicted where Ms Mara might be heading in her questions with her muttering earlier on, let me just say to Jenny Mara that I'm very pleased that Scottish local authorities have increased expenditure on education for the last 3 years, and I look forward to local authorities continuing that trend.
That concludes questions in the statement. Unfortunately, Alistair Allen, Gail Ross and Stuart McMillan weren't able to get in. Can I say to everyone, please, that when, as presiding officers, we cut off people mid-statement and ask for questions, there are complaints. The other side of that is that people ramble on, rather, both in questions and answers, and other colleagues get missed out. So please have a think to how we deal with these things in the future. We will move on to the next item of business. Good.